Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. I greatly appreciate you being with us. These podcasts are designed to explore some of the issues that touch us and our families in light of the revolution in longevity. As we reshape our entire Jewish world, we appreciate your support as well. And you can follow us and listen to these podcasts on our website, jewishsacredaging.com, as well as following us on our Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. And again, we are very grateful for your donations, which help further our work. And it is with great pleasure that we welcome to today's podcast, Seekers of Meaning podcast, Rabbi Lynnda Targan, the author of Funny You Don't Look Like a Rabbi. I used to get that all the time. So anyway, Lynnda, nice to see you. Thank you very much for being with us. Welcome to Seekers of Meaning. How are you doing today? In the middle of July, we're recording this in July.
I'm doing well today. How are you doing today?
Well, all things equal, not too bad. Can't complain, and doesn't do me any good anyway, so we'll move on. This is a very exciting book. Again, it's a personal journey book. And it covers really your story, your life, but I want to jump, instead of doing let's start at the beginning. You write in one of the chapters about your calling, and it's always fascinating to me, from our tradition, the prophetic calls and the calls to the patriarchs and matriarchs, etc., and the rabbinic period, but we don't use that term a lot in the contemporary Jewish world about being called, and I think it's a very appropriate word. I think it's a word that has tremendous spiritual meaning. So 2 questions to begin with. One, talk to me about your being called, because one of the chapter headings is the calling. And the follow-up question to that is, do you think that people are being called in a spiritual sense, and in the most part just repress it or ignore it, sort of like the passage from Kings and the Kol Demamah Daka, the still small voice that is calling it. So those are what I want to start out with, the first 2 questions. What was your calling, and then about other people as well?
Well, I write in the book that my calling came in very small voices to begin with. It didn't come from within. It really came from without. I called some of those people angels. One of their voices was Amy Eilberg, Rabbi Amy Eilberg. She was the first woman to be ordained by the conservative movement, and she came to our synagogue, Temple Sinai in Dresher, Pennsylvania. Her father was a congressman, and so she was kind of a native daughter as well. And I looked at her and I thought, wow. And I actually saw myself in the bima, but I dismissed it summarily. Thought, oh, how could I? I don't know an aleph from a bet. I'm not as smart as she is. We did those comparisons and so forth. So I was very dismissive about that first glimmer. Then one day I was away with my husband, who is not terribly introspective, much of a seeker, not meditative, and not terribly religious, although very spiritual, I will say. And it was one of those intimate moments between a husband and wife in a long marriage. And I said to him, God forbid, Larry, I didn't think should ever happen to you. I would never remarry. And he said, oh, yes, you would. In a minute, you would marry some rabbi or you would become one. And that was really an aha moment for me. I thought, wow, this is a man that really knows me better than anybody else. And he said that. And then later on, I went to Auschwitz. And that really, I guess, is the Oprah moment, that I went there and I saw myself in the midst of all this devastation and destruction. I picked up a clump of soil, and the soil had bones in it of my ancestors. And I thought about the Jewish life that I had growing up, not terribly formal, but I had immigrant Polish grandparents that were very much involved with their rituals and their daily lives and their Shabbat and so on and so forth, which, by the way, was my saving grace because I had divorced parents. which changed the trajectory of my life. But I thought to myself, my God, look at how much the Jewish people have lost standing there at Auschwitz. And I said, I want to go back to the place where people knocked on your door and said, this is Shabbat. Shabbat's coming in 20 minutes, where people really were celebrating Jewish life, where Jewish life was in front and center. And so that's what I said, maybe I can do that. That's my calling. Perhaps I can do that. Could I be a rabbi? And again, I kind of dismissed it summarily, but I thought, whatever it is, I'm being called to do this, and I need to follow it. So shortly thereafter, I went back to Philadelphia. I got involved with the Holocaust community. I wrote the Holocaust commemorative program for 5 years for JCRC in the city of Philadelphia. I met a lot of Holocaust survivors and their children. And then I started to take classes based on a conversation that I had with Danny Siegel, the poet and writer and influencer, I should say. And he said, you don't study enough. That's your problem. You're disconnected. You should know more. And so when I went back to school after 25 years, the first thing that the instructor, her name was Laura Levitt, you may know her, Dr. Laura Levitt, said to me, have you ever thought of becoming a rabbi? And so there it was, over and over and over again. I kept hearing those voices, and eventually I was put on the path. I would say an uneven path, but I was put on the path to head towards the rabbinate.
So you mentioned Auschwitz before we get to the follow-up question. You mentioned Auschwitz, and when I was reading the book, it seemed like that was your Sinai moment. That was the moment that something clicked. And you write in the book a Talmudic passage from Avodah Zarah, which you quote, there are times in our lives when we can grasp the reason for our existence in a single moment. Talk to me about that and how that's obviously something that hit you, but, talk to me about how you feel about that particular Talmudic passage and how it relates to not only yourself, but people. And do they understand in your experience that sense of calling, or that this is one of those moments that something profound is happening in their life?
Yeah, it certainly was for me. And that particular passage from Avodah Zarah really resonates for me again and again. And in fact, when I was ordained, that was the pasuk that I chose for my ordination page. And I think you're right. I think that people do have little voices, such as the ones that I had, and sometimes within, and sometimes they do push it away. And in fact, my book is about not pushing those voices away. My book is about inviting those voices in and following those voices and seeing where they take you, not ignoring them. And it doesn't matter how old you are. I know somebody now that is 79. She's going for her PhD. I know a lot of people now who have changed careers. They were former teachers, psychologists, whatever. By necessity, they've had to change their careers, and they're being called. They're being called to make cookies, or they're being called to bake something else, or they're being called to social justice platforms or whatever. And that is one of the goals of my book, was to allow people to see that they need to address their calling and to listen really hard for it. And I think now may be the moment, because now we are, for all intents and purposes, alone, isolated. And it may be the moment to look inside or to hear the voices that have been resonating for a while and see where they take you.
Did you find it, well, when you decided, when you entered the seminary, and you talk in the book about a variety of paths and a variety of different seminaries, what was it like for you going back, not as a 25-year-old or a 23-year-old? I mean, you lived your life, you had a profession, you had a career. Some of my students at HUC are second career rabbis, and they bring a certain different perspective to their studies and to the rabbinate. What was it like for you?
Yeah, well, it was both. It was both daunting because at that point I was 50 years old. In my late 40s, I earned 2 master's degrees, but I hadn't been back at school since I graduated from Temple University in 1971. Of course, I had studied and taken a few courses here and there, but nothing seriously and nothing for credit. But it was daunting, and I didn't go to an Ivy League school, and I didn't have an early formal Jewish education, and I didn't go to Jewish camps, and I didn't have any of that. So I felt less than in many ways. But I also had a lot of confidence because I did have what you said I had, which was that I had a successful career, I had a successful marriage, I had children that ran the gamut of being a blessing and being a pain in the neck. But I learned a lot from being a mother. So I think that I came back to school with a lot of wisdom. The Hebrew was a little bit hard for me. I went twice to Israel to be in immersion programs. Once I went to Ulpan Akiva for a month. The second time I went to Hebrew University for a semester. And that beefed up my Hebrew. But learning languages in your 50s is not that easy. But I was a very good writer. And so that I was able to write things very, very quickly. And the time that it took me to not have to spend time on writing, that's what I used to beef up my Hebrew. And so I just loved being there. I said every day that I was at the seminary, at the Academy for Jewish Religion, that if I died today, God forbid, but if I died today, I'd be doing exactly what I want to do. I love engaging in those Jewish texts. I love learning Jewish wisdom. I loved being with mostly my second career colleagues that were fellow students. I had a plastic surgeon, a former dancer, several psychologists, a dentist, so on and so forth. And they brought unique perspectives to the studies. And one of my colleagues, Rabbi Marcia Prager, had said to me early on when I sought her advice, she said, you only go into the rabbinate if you have nothing else to do. And I said, well, I have a lot to do. I can write and I can teach and I'm a mother and I'm a housekeeper and all of these things. And then I realized that was the calling. There was nothing else I could do. Nothing else was going to satisfy what I wanted to do on the day-to-day. And that was the calling.
I got to ask you this question because it comes up a lot with second career. When you sat down with your family and your kids and said, this is my path, this is what I'm going to do, what were your kids' reaction? We know what your husband's reaction. What were your kids? Did they just say, are you out of your mind? Or did they say, great, Mom, we're 100% behind you? What was the reaction?
No, they thought I was a nerd, but they always thought I was a nerd, so they thought, all right, they rolled their eyes and they thought, well, Mom is privileged and all of that. So they knew I was very steeped into my Judaism. They knew that. We always had Shabbat, and I kept kosher-ish. They knew that I was very much steeped into my Jewish life. I don't know that they would have imagined that I would have gone to school. But when I did, and as I was going through it, they really admired me. They really thought I had a lot of tenacity, and they really respected the fact that I went for my calling, and that I actually got to the finish line. And I think they really respected that model, that you can do it. It doesn't matter how old you are, if you have a reason for being, if you're seeking meaning, and you want to do it. There's more than one way to skin a cat, of course. Then go for it. So they were very proud of me, and they are proud of me. They're proud of this book too, I may say.
So we're talking with Rabbi Lynnda Targan here in Philadelphia, the author of this book, Funny You Don't Look Like a Rabbi. Lynnda, and I would imagine it's available at the usual places, not only bookstores, but through the great God Amazon, um, who delivers all at the moment's notice, I guess. Lynnda, in my world and a lot of the stuff that we've done, I put a great stock in family of origin and the messages that are given or withheld as we grow up. Um, you spend a significant amount of time in the beginning of the book walking us through the family of origin journey. Looking back with all your training now and life experience, what was the impact of your own personal family origin on the eventual calling? Do you think in any way, shape, or form what you decided to do was somewhere in the deep recesses of your soul planted in there when you were growing up and dealing with all kinds of stuff with your parents and the divorce and grandparents and stuff like that? Do you think somewhere along the way? Because go ahead.
Not deep in my soul. It's right here on my chin. Um, my parents were divorced, and they were American. Both of them were first generation Americans, and they wanted to be American. And so they kind of dismissed their immigrant parents' lifestyle. And so I didn't get much of it from my nuclear family, which then imploded. But my grandparents lived in Brooklyn. We lived in Reading, by the way. And so we used to take this 4-hour trek to Brooklyn. And I was the first granddaughter and the first great granddaughter. I remember my great grandparents vividly, actually. And I was what? I was hailed like the Messiah in the house of Yaskoka. That was their names. They loved me so much, and I watched. And as I said, I was not, because I was a girl. Really, there wasn't much emphasis on formal education for me. But I think it's on page 26 of my book, I talk about the fact that my grandmother took me to the synagogue in East New York, Brooklyn, the corner from their house, and I watched that scene, and I called it like the theater. I thought it was such a dramatic moment because my grandmother, who generally was in the kitchen cooking from 4:00 in the morning on, said, "Would you like to go and hear the shofar, the sound of the shofar?" And I had no idea what the sound of the shofar was, but I went with her. We sat up in the women's section, and I looked down and I saw this drama. And that stuck with me for life. And that scene, what we call now the service of the heart, became the heart of my journey. Yeah.
You write a lot, and you just alluded to it, the impact of your grandparents. And now as a grandparent, I understand that a lot more than I did a couple of years ago. But also there's a lot of work now being done with the Jewish grandparent cohort, especially boomers who are reshaping what it means to be a grandparent, a much more activist grandparent. But just how important was that relationship with you? Because you do spend a lot of time in the book writing about it, and it's always fascinating to see those messages, not only of the family of origin of mom and dad, but also you were lucky enough to have that embrace of really powerful, loving, supportive grandparents.
Yeah. They were everything. And they loved me so much. They thought that children were, I think I have a Talmudic passage there, children are the roses in the garden or something like that. And that's how they saw me. And anything I wanted to do or say, or, they were there for me in every way possible. And that is why I didn't turn into a Lulu bird after my parents became divorced, because that was a nightmare. We left our home. We had no money. My mother was depressed. It was just such a terrible time. But I had my grandparents around, and their rituals and their life cycle events, and that really kept me sane. And by the way, I'm now a grandmother as well. I have two grandchildren. They are, I have a girl 7, her name is Sage. A girl 9, her name is Sage, and a boy, Darren, his name is, he's 7. And they're the light of my lives. They are the light of my lives. And we try very much to get together on Shabbat, even virtually now, to light the Shabbat candles. We're very much involved with their lives. And in fact, the pandemic, that is the worst thing about being in quarantine is to be separated from them in so many ways. That's been the worst part of it. But I think that because my grandparents were so present in my lives and I saw the impact that they had on me and my sister, and we're both, accomplished women with long marriages and so on and so forth, that I realized how important it is to be involved with your grandchildren. And we are. We're very involved with them. And as much Jewish life as they will allow us to bring into their lives, we do.
So you mentioned the power in witnessing with grandparents. You mentioned something else that I wanted to push you on or just ask you about, because you operate as a community rabbi here in the Delaware Valley area, and obviously life cycle events. And one of the workshops that we do in Jewish Sacred Aging for congregations deals with rituals. So talk to me about, and especially now we're seeing this real research, at least we are seeing this resurgence of interest and creativity in the importance of ritual in people's lives across the denomination, but especially with elders. What's been your experience with that?
Well, I always thought that ritual was very important because it concretizes time. It concretizes the time as you're going through it, and it creates memories. And I think that ritual is very, very important. So, for example, on Shabbat, we always light Shabbat candles. In general, we always have groups of people over, not now, but we have groups of people that we celebrate Shabbat with. And I've taken many, many women to the mikvah, not just for family purity, not just for marriage, or not just for conversion, but to concretize other events in their lives. I've taken women to the mikvah because it was a havdalah. It was a separation for them. So I've taken women to the mikvah because they were in the middle of a divorce and they wanted to mark the time that the marriage ended with that ritual. I've taken women there who have entered their chemotherapy. So I've taken them to the mikvah as a celebration. They're no longer involved with that particular part of their illness. They're moving on to a path of health and so forth. The sukkah. One of the things that I had to give up when I moved into Center City, into an apartment, was the sukkah. We had a sukkah for many, many years, and I could seat uncomfortably about 26 people in our sukkah. And for almost 8 nights, I did the cooking and the serving and the teaching and everything in our sukkah. And people looked forward to it. And especially after 9/11, people were banging down our doors to know if they could be invited to our sukkah that year. They wanted to huddle together. And so I am very much in support of institutions, of synagogues and institutions. However, the reality is that many, many people are not involved with institutional life, and I need to be there for those people as well. I need to be there for K-Roof, for outreach, and to be there at their pivotal moments as well. And so we do a lot of rituals. I do a lot of rituals for people that are unaffiliated. Brisses, I don't do the cutting, of course. I do the naming part often, as I'm sure do with Moelim and Mohelim, and I'm there for funerals, and I'm there for Shiva minions, and I'm there for baby namings, and of course weddings. So yeah, I think rituals are very, very important. Lighting candles for memorial reasons. I'll show up for shloshim. Many people that have bought homes in other places, second homes, have asked me to come over. Would I come over and put a mezuzah on their door? So I think that people are engaged in wanting to have rituals as well. And as much as I can create them, and as much as I can be creative in creating them, that's a continuing goal for me.
Your seminary training was at the Academy of Jewish Religion, which you write lovingly about, which is a cross-denominational, non-denominational seminary. And you alluded to some of this just in the last response. So talk to me about your feeling now. We're in the middle of this, even without the pandemic, this really, I think, beginning of a radical transformation of the American Jewish community that is putting a lot of pressure. It changes all the denominations. And I worked for the Reform movement for 3 decades, conservative movement, Reconstructionist, the movements. From your perspective of operating, as you say, for people who perhaps have moved away from institutional Judaism, where do you see this trend go? Do you see this as a trend that's growing? Do you really see that the denominational structure of American Judaism, which was its strength in post-World War II America, do you see it diminishing, or do you see it just reimagining itself?
We're going to have to wait and see a little bit, because nobody predicted that we would have this pandemic, and this pandemic is changing things radically. So I'm not exactly sure what will be happening in the future. I know a lot of people are getting very comfortable on Zoom, and there's something about, just showing up for a morning minyan in your blue jeans or your yoga pants or whatever, and not having to get dressed or travel anywhere, and going and being part of a community. And so I think that is a piece of it. The people are getting a little bit comfortable with being in their homes. At the same time, people are clamoring, are starved, are thirsty to be together with community. So I'm not exactly sure, what the trends will be. I do see a bit of a trend towards post-denominationalism, but not in the Orthodox movement necessarily. I'm still seeing that they're kind of where they are, and that's okay. That's okay. That works for them. They're kind of more of the absolutes. I think in more liberal Judaism, the lines are blurring a lot. They're blurring a lot. What do you think,
Lynnda? Oh no, I know that. I don't think I know that they're blurring a lot, and I think that 5 years from now, the American Jewish community is going to be radically restructured. And I consult with congregations all the time, and basically, one of the mantras that we talk about, especially as it deals with our constituency in Jewish sacred aging, is if you, after this pandemic, go back to what you were doing before, you'll probably be out of business within 5 years. And I mean that. I think and there's a great opportunity for congregations to really expand their footprint, but just to take use of the technology, because the 20s and 30s are certainly our grandchildren generation who are growing up with knowledgeable of technology. That's where they're going to get everything. And so this is a very exciting time. If people choose to see it that way, and rather than negative. Before we start running out of time, I just want to make sure if people want to get in touch with you, you have a website. If somebody wanted to contact you, how do they do that?
I have a website, www.rabbilynda, it's LYNNDA, LyndaTargan.com. And you can certainly, my phone number's on there, and my email is on there. So please feel free to call me. I love to hear from my readers. I love to hear from people who have questions. One of the things about being a community rabbi is that it's difficult to have collegial relationships, and also, to be with people that are not in a particular community at a particular time. So I seek that all the time. I'm looking for that. I'm looking for that connection as well. And I learn from everybody, everyone who gets in touch with me, anyone that I teach in my Midrash Institute, anyone that I do a life cycle event for or with, I learned something from them as well. So it keeps me jumping, it keeps me inspired, and it keeps me engaged. And I'm so grateful for that.
Rabbi Lynnda Targan, 2 N's, and that's in the book too, of how you did that. The book is funny. You don't look like a rabbi, and thank you very much, Lynnda, for being with us. Good luck with the book, and stay safe, stay healthy. And as a fellow Temple Owl, it's good. Always good to see a Temple. Except your husband evidently went to Northeast High School. For those of you who are not in the Philadelphia area, as a graduate of the major high school in Philadelphia Central, we really, I have pity on your husband as a North. Did you go to Northeast?
I did, both for 10th through 10th through 12th. But I started school.
All right. Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that, but you can't help it. You can't. As a Central grad in Temple, what can you do? But thank you, Lynnda. Thank you very much. Good luck with the book.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure. And to all of you, thank you again for listening to this edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. And a reminder that you can follow us on our website, jewishsacredaging.com, and our Facebook page, Jewish Sacred Aging on Facebook, as well as the Jewish Sacred Aging podcast on Facebook. And if you wish to make a tax-free donation to help further our work and the work of these podcasts, please go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com, and click on the icon button. And I appreciate any comments or suggestions. You can send them to me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. These podcasts are recorded at the studios of Lubectin Global Media in beautiful Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and we give thanks to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Again, thank you for being with us. We look forward to greeting you on the next Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. Todah and Shalom.